Hello, everybody, and you are listening to the Soberful podcast, and I am joined today by Arlina Allen. Hi, Arlina, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, it's really good to see you. Arlina's been on the show before. She has a podcast called One Day at a Time and is another person in very long-term sobriety. How long have you been sober for now?
It was 30 years in April.
Wow,
So I
that's
got sober when
amazing.
I was 10.
Tell everyone a little bit about like what you do and who you are and that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So, like you said, I host a podcast. I'm a woman in long term recovery, and I help people who are struggling with alcohol who aren't really interested in doing like their traditional passive recovery. But you and I both know that, recovery is 10% about the alcohol and 90% about like emotional sobriety. I just saw, I think you had a video that did really well the other day, and I
Yeah,
was like, that's
yeah,
my girl. Yeah, I
yeah.
call it emotion management. It doesn't matter what you call it, but the thing is, it's like we need to, really master our emotions if we want to lead productive lives. And so, really, my focus is a lot around how to build self esteem, which I feel like is kind of at the core of everything, reshaping our beliefs so that they allow us. It's kind of funny. We go on this track, we have a feeling, we think a thought, we make a decision, we invoke the law of cause and effect. And we have an experience that actually goes back to confirm the belief. So this confirmation bias loop. And so my suggestion is that if you're not getting what you want, you need to sort of go back and look at the presupposition to see if there is a flaw in the thinking process there. And that's a lot of what recovery is. It's a lot of self-reflection. So I try to guide people through this process of like, where are you now? Where do you want to be? What is your thinking? How are you feeling? What are your practices? And try to help people get to where they need to be.
So you have a book coming out called what I want to get the title right. So what's the title?
It's the 12-step guide for skeptics, clearing up common misconceptions of a path to sobriety.
Ooh, now we have made no secret that both of us are fans of the 12 step because honestly, when you have been sober as long as we both have, that was the only thing that was around. That was the only show
Yeah,
in town back
thank
in the
God.
day, right?
I'm so glad. Because you know
Before
what?
the
Now
internet.
yeah, now there's all this, and listen, I am not trying to disparage anybody's path of sobriety.
No,
There's a million ways to do it, but I am so glad that that was really my only option because
me
I
too.
sort of am skeptical by nature, and I had some religious trauma when I was growing up. So if I had had multiple options, I may not have gone the
Mm,
traditional 12-step route, and I would have missed out on like this amazing experience that has so many benefits. Like we don't even have time to talk about all the benefits of the 12
mm,
steps. But it was very confronting. There were a lot of things about it that were very confronting. And, I've had 341 episodes of the podcast, and I've interviewed many people who've gotten sober through different avenues.
mm.
And I will ask, did you try traditional, 12 step? And when they say no and they explain why, I'm like, that's in my mind, not to be disrespectful, but I'm in my mind, I'm like, that's not a thing. Like it's that there is a way around that obstacle. And it
Yeah.
just got to the point. I actually didn't want to write this book, but it got to the point where it was so frustrating for me that I was like, look, through the lens of compassion, I get why you're fearful. You might have
Yeah.
some limited beliefs. There's really at the base of all of the objections are, I don't want to say excuses, but the reasons like resistance. We can talk about recovery resistance. That's a big thing. But at the root of all of that is fear and misunderstanding. And so I'm like,
Mm.
hey, let's just clear this up. And if this is helpful to you, great. If not, great. There are other ways. I'm just saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The 12 steps are a magical transformational process, and it's a worthy endeavor.
Oh my God. I am so I can't wait to get into this.
Yeah,
You wrote the piece, you read the piece that I wrote a few years ago.
girl. Dude, I gotta tell
That's how
you,
we connected, I think.
I have to tell you because your piece that you wrote was an inspiration to me to write the book. but also your piece was in response to something else. I don't want to like give credit or draw attention to that other, but there was a very damning, condemning article that was written and saying all these things. And I was like, wow, that is
It was all
not
misinformation. It was all like made up. It was misinformation.
misconceptions. Yeah,
Yeah,
made up from somebody.
misconception. Yeah, yeah, it made
Yeah,
no sense.
yeah.
And it was in the New York Times.
I
And
know.
I was like, well, AA is not going to write a rebuttal to this, but this is all like
It's all bullshit.
it's not true. It's just not true. And I wanted to just lay out the facts of the 12-step program as I saw them. And that post has had hundreds of thousands of views.
No, it's brilliant. You did a
I will
great
link to Arlina's book in the show notes, and I'll link to this piece as well. Okay, so where do you start in this book? Where do you start? What do you what are the...
Yeah, in the traditional parlance of 12 step, I start with my story.
Okay.
Right? Like, how did I even get here? Right? So it is a little framing in the beginning, like, hey, I'm not speaking for any organization. I don't represent AA or any 12-step organization. I just do a little disclaimer stuff. And I'm like, just set the table a little bit.
Let's just say there is a big confusion between anonymity and secrecy. So anonymity got confused with secrecy in that never talk about it. So let's be clear. We are talking as representatives of ourselves.
Yeah.
We're not representing AA or the 12 steps. We are not. So that's been, I think, the biggest problem is that people haven't been allowed to talk about the program and how it works publicly because of the confusion with anonymity and secrecy. You break the anonymity when you talk as a representative, and we are not doing that.
Well, it's so interesting because a lot of people don't go to the actual AA.org website to find out what the public relations policy is, right? Like they say that you can tell your whole story, but they ask that you leave off your last name. Like the book that I'm writing, AA World Services wouldn't grant me permission to use the steps in my book unless I took off my last name. And I was like, I don't care. My initials are AA, but I do not represent AA. But I was like, I really don't care. But they say you can tell your story and blah blah blah. But if you're public, they don't want you to use your last name. And I was like, fine, I don't care. But yeah, they have an interesting policy. But you're right, it's not about secrecy. They just don't want people to be tied or be confused with a representative. And that is kind of one of the premises of the book is there is no person that represents AA, right?
Yeah.
Because so one of the reasons I hear that people either have tried it and decided to discard it or set it aside is because of the people. And so in the book, one of the tenets is that the program and the people are two very separate things. They're intended to work together.
Yeah.
But let's keep in mind that the people are there because, we have mental illness, myself included. I'm not like, it's not a condemning thing. Listen, I'm not ashamed or embarrassed that I have mental illness, right? Most people do. It's a spectrum, but anyway, that's beside the point. But people say, oh, I went to a meeting and these people were assholes. And so, out it goes. And I'm like, those people are not representative of the organization. And oh, by the way, that is not the program. The program is the steps. And the steps are amazing, right? These are two separate things.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, but I would argue that when you meet somebody in a program who is challenging, working with what they bring up inside you, that's the magic. Like if you can learn patience, love, tolerance in the face of somebody's dysfunction, you actually gain compassion for yourself because you can't escape the same measuring stick that you judge others by. Right. And so, it's a valuable experience. Even the challenging people bring value to you because they sort of bring up the things that need to be healed. So that's kind of one of the tenets of the book is the program and the people are two separate things. And granted, I was actually very lucky that I had access to amazing meetings. And I think now with all the online meetings, everybody has access to great meetings. You just kind of have to find your people. But I found my people, and I found people that were so compassionate. I could tell them the things I was most ashamed of, and I was met with nothing but compassion and empathy and connection, right? They'd be like, oh, by the way, I did that shit too.
Mm.
And it just alleviated me from so much shame. You know, they say that empathy is the antidote to shame. That's absolutely been my experience.
I think I agree that you have to separate the fellowship from the program, and that's the first obstacle, is getting past a lot of the misinformation from the members themselves and
Oh,
the
God. Yeah.
shenanigans that go on. Um,
So many shenanigans.
so many
Woo.
shenanigans. Oh yeah, we've seen it all.
I have to ask you, when you first started going to meetings, were there any women that kind of pulled you aside to say, "Hey, watch out for the
Oh yeah,
sheep's, the
yeah,
wolves
yeah.
in sheep's
Because
clothing"?
I was young. I was in my 20s. I was young, like probably like you, I think,
How
and
old were you when you got sober?
27.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I was 25, but very close.
And I absolutely, my main problem was I couldn't get a boyfriend. That was my main problem as I saw it. And I
You're the same
absolutely,
person.
yeah, I was absolutely, would have gone off with the first guy. I would have gone off with the first guy who looked at me right in AA. The blessing was I got sober in Key West, Florida. Half the men are gay, the other half are drunk. Problem solved.
Wow, what a blessing that was, huh?
So I do remember that, but I do, and I've done it myself as well. I've like the predatory behavior. I've been like, you back the fuck off. So I've, as an older woman, as a more senior member, I have protected younger women from that,
Oh, for sure.
because that's that is, I mean, we could have a whole episode about that behavior and the 13th step. We can even do that. But let's stay
Oh,
with
I'd
some of
love to
like
do that.
the miss.
The
So as I
misinformation.
see it,
Yeah,
what the program does is it enables you to have complete experience, complete responsibility for the experience you want to have.
yeah.
And that's really terrifying, because what the program forces you to do is it forces you out of your story. And we want to keep our story of why it's not fair, why this happened, why it's not my fault, why it was them, why if this had happened to you, right? And there is a massive amount of resistance to that. And the program takes you to the edge of a cliff, and it says you got to jump and God will catch you, and you've got to be completely responsible for the experience you want to have.
Well,
And
you're
I
making this sound a little scary, Veronica. Can I add that
uh-huh.
yes, to all that? Absolutely, yes. I also had like a compassionate, supportive guide that felt like a safety net through
Mm,
these really scary things that you're talking about, because I did have these stories and I thought I was right. I thought it was
mhm,
justified. I
mm,
fancy myself a logical, rational science
mm,
girl,
mhm,
right? And so I had reasons. I had reasons that I thought the way I did. And I had a few women that were like, "Oh, honey, it's yes, but this idea that, oh, it's not my fault." There was a lot of that was like I'm a victim, right? Like all that shit that was happening to me. Like I didn't understand that I played a part in it. And it wasn't until I did the 4-step, which was so good. I love the 4-step, that I realized, oh, people, I thought I was a victim. Turns out I was provoking people and they were responding to me. Oops. Oh, my bad. I didn't realize that. But I always had somebody be like, oh, I could see how you would think that way, but here's another perspective on that. And, I feel like limiting beliefs have two components to them. It's either false information or missing information. And going
mm,
through the process of the 12 steps helped me sort that out. But it wasn't
mm,
like a mean, it was confronting. They say that the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. That is how I've learned that I'm on the right path, right? Like I have learned that when something is pissing me off, I go, ooh, there is a kernel of truth like buried deep somewhere. I am a master at fooling myself. And it's hard for me to get to the root cause. But this 12-step process has a way, like they say, if you work the steps will work you. It had a way of sort of lifting that denial in a compassionate way, so I could see myself clearly. You know, you and I have talked before about the self-examination process, right? But it's self-examination with compassion. There was a lot of that whatever the victim experience, there was a lot of that was actually valid, right? And it wasn't my fault, but it was my responsibility. And people who argue that 12 steps, it's like, oh, you're abdicating responsibility to this higher power and you're this meek doormat and you're surrendering your will and you're, you know, it sounds scary. It sounds like, oh, you're abdicating responsibility. It's the exact opposite. It's
Mm-hmm.
the exact opposite, because
Mm-hmm.
when you understand what this higher power is, maybe we should talk about triggering words, right? There's like the big three triggering words that keep people out. But this, one of them is this idea of God. And you, oh, you're going to surrender your will to God. Well, can we just talk about like what God is? It's,
Mm.
you know, for me, it was like inside me. It was my internal compass. It's this loving
Mm.
energy that's all powerful, whatever. But that's what I'm abdicating my responsibility. I'm tuning into my own heart, my own inner compass. And that's it. So it's not, that's still taking responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think?
Yeah, and what I mean by that is what it does is it gives you the skills and the ability to choose your response to things. That's
There it is.
basically it. That's it. Is that
You said it in way few words. Yes, yes,
and
yes.
when I say being responsible for the experience you want to have, like there's so much we're not responsible for. Like we don't have the pandemic, there's just tons of things that have happened to you in the past that they weren't your fault or your responsibility, and also some people have been really harmed, especially as children. All the 12 steps are is that they will give you the ability to choose a response
Yeah.
to these events, and that response will be one that's more helpful to you.
Yeah. I learned the
That's
difference
it. That's
between
it.
I learned the difference between responsibility and cause. Like there's a lot of
Mm,
things I didn't, like you were saying, like I didn't cause the pandemic. Like I didn't cause,
yeah.
there's like, you know, like, did I cause this? Or do you know what I'm saying? Or am I responsible for, like, what am I responsible for? And at the end of the day, it's like, there's this, a lot of talk about power, you know, I'm powerless over people, places and things. And I would argue that we actually have a lot of influence. You know, we don't have power, like we can't control people like puppets. We have influence. And it starts with being authentic and tuning into who you really are. And then you can respond from like a grounded, loving place, right? Not a fearful place. Like I lived in reaction mode from fear until I entered the program and sort of went through this whole process. And then I was able to respond from like a peaceful, loving place.
Mm.
Very different than reacting from a fearful place.
And that's that's the thing, is that we have been responding to events in a way that's been really destructive for us and really
Yeah.
harmful to us,
Yeah.
and we want to change that to have a response that is helpful, that is safe, that is allows us to grow, and that's all the 12 steps boil down to. They're a mechanical process to have a shift in perception.
There it is. This shift in perception. Yeah. And that's what we're trying to, that's what I was really trying to do with the book, is change perceptions. Like there are these misconceptions, you know, when people are confronted with the steps. Like when I read the steps the first time, I don't know how you felt about it, but when I first read it, I was like, okay, what does that mean? Like I didn't know that it was largely a writing exercise, but I saw words like alcoholic or God or powerless. Like those are like the big three words that people really freak out about.
Yeah, yeah,
But there is so much context behind those words. For instance, people are like, oh, they see powerless and they go, I'm not powerless.
yeah.
Like there's a lot of high functioning. Like I bet you were pretty high functioning. I was pretty high functioning. People are like, oh, they can't look at their lives and be like, oh, but I have a lot going on. I'm not powerless. But they're missing the whole phrase. It's powerless over alcohol. We're not saying that you're powerless in life necessarily, right? It's over alcohol.
Well, I just want to say that is where the program's been diluted and wishy-washied out, right? I've met people who are like, oh, my sponsor made me write down all the things I'm powerless over. Like, that's where it gets a bit crazy. It's like, I am powerless. Like, I have proved to myself that when I ingest alcohol, all kinds of shit happens.
Oh
And
yeah, like what?
they were never, that was never the plan. Like, like, you got
Yeah.
to just accept that. Yeah,
Yeah.
the whole powerless thing is really
Yeah,
misunderstood.
it's confusing. And so what I would argue is that everybody to some extent is powerless over alcohol in the sense that if you ingest alcohol, it
Yeah.
kicks off a cascade of chemical reactions that changes how you feel, it changes how you behave, it affects your brain, your ability to process information and make decisions. And you are powerless to reverse that at
Mm-hmm.
will, right?
Mm.
You are under the influence of
Mm-hmm.
alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and it's a predictable cause and effect, right? For most people, like
Mm.
when I drink alcohol, I can reliably predict that I will feel different. And for me, I behave in ways that are not in alignment with my sober values.
Mm.
And for me, that just doesn't, it's not a viable option. It's
Yeah.
not a viable option for me to relax or to have fun or escape my feelings.
Yeah. What about God and that word? How do you approach that?
Well, what I'll tell you, what I was told, what I've learned is that if you have a problem with the word God, you probably have a problem with somebody else's God.
Mm.
And what I learned pretty early on, words are symbols, and we assign meaning to symbols, right? And so it's almost as if this word God has been buried under many layers of glass. It becomes distorted. It becomes unclear. And so I had a sponsor that was like, you know what? Make a list of all the positive attributes of God that you wish God was or you think it might be. So I wrote my list and she goes, on the other side of the column, write all the things that you don't want a God to be. And I was like, judgmental, punishing, just all the jealous. If you're raised in religion, you hear God is jealous and just all this
Mm.
stuff, punishing. And so I wrote on my whole list to her as step 2 exercise for me. She said, let me see your list. So I handed her the paper. She tore it in half and gave me the positive side. She's like, start with this. See if you can run the experiment and see if you can validate the positive side. So energy goes where attention, what's that saying? Energy flows where attention goes, something like that. What you think about, you bring about. So I
Mm.
started looking at these positive attributes that I wanted: loving, powerful, insightful, the master organizer, planner, all these things, and generous, abundant. And I started looking for those things in my life. Like she was like, how do you want God to show up? And I'm like, I don't even know. And typically God would show up to me God would talk to me through people. I'm like, listen, God, I don't know I don't know what language you speak, but please make it obvious. Send me gentle lessons, make it obvious. I kind of started there. Magical shit started happening.
Mm.
Like and I knew it felt like God because I could feel it in my body. And I was getting these little, sometimes in the program, you hear people talking about God shots or spiritual
Mm. Mm.
experiences,
Mm.
where if you try to explain it to somebody else, it doesn't have the same meaning to them because it was personal to me and God.
Mm.
And really, you don't even have to use that word. You can use, the word doesn't matter. It's the energetic experience that you feel, that it's like the evidence. Like I couldn't really relate to this ethereal man in the sky daddy thing like that. I just didn't relate to it at all. But I needed evidence. And so I started having these experiences just by trusting a little bit, just by doing these simple practices,
Mm.
prayer, meditation, helping others. I started having like these really amazing experiences, and it felt like evidence to me,
Mm.
things I couldn't explain. I'm sure you've had those experiences too, haven't you?
Yeah, interestingly, I didn't grow up with any religion, and so I actually didn't have any prejudice. Like I grew up back in England when I was in school. They still had like we used to have like an assembly with hymns and prayers, and then the government did away with that. But we didn't go to church really, like occasionally once in a blue moon, but not really. There was no religion in my house. So I always just thought God was a nice idea, but not really relevant to me. Like I thought it was like I just didn't have any of that. So that was an obstacle I didn't have to navigate. I was completely like, oh, God as you understand him. So I can just sort of, and it's really changed and evolved over the years.
Yeah.
And I've always come from God is perfect love, just perfect love, and anything else, I don't know, I'm not sure about. But God is perfect love, and the spiritual. When we say spiritual, we mean our inner life. Like we all have an inner life, right? We all have an inside thoughts, feelings, imagery, emotions that no one else can access. No one. We are the only person who is aware of our inner life, and we all have one. And we all have a lot going on inside. And spirituality is simply the nurturing and the exploring of that. And that has been the greatest gift of sobriety and the 12 steps for me is, I just started with, I've read A Course in Miracles, and I've read religious books, and and I was really into the Conversations with God books back in the day, like Law of Attraction, like the Bible, like I just have eaten it all up, and I just all find it very interesting and nurturing to my inner life. And interestingly, do you know who Emmett Fox is?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Emmett, so have you read the Sermon on the Mount?
Many years ago. Yeah, when I first got sober, I think I read like 30 books my first year of sobriety. I'm a progressive learner, but he's great.
I deeply love Emmett Fox, deeply.
Yeah.
And Emmett Fox was a Christian philosopher and who Bill W. read. And so my sponsor said, you need to read the Sermon on the Mount. And it was the first time I actually came across Christian teachings that made sense to me. And he deconstructs Jesus's teachings and says that, like, about taking care. Jesus teaches about taking care of your inner self. And I was like, my mind is blown by all of that. And I love following those threads. I'm just curious to follow all of those threads and to think about it. And that for me is the greatest gift of sobriety, is this inner journey.
Yeah, it is the inner journey. It's the self-reflection and being able. I needed a practical process to help me sort this all out. Like I kept hearing like, oh, we need to do the work. I was like, what does that
What
even
is the
mean?
work?
What is the work? Okay, sign me up. What is the work?
Yes.
And so doing the steps was the work of sorting out what was mine and what wasn't. It helped me to let go of what wasn't mine so I could bear the weight of what was. And let me just give you a quick example, because when I grew up, I grew up with my parents divorced when I was very young, and my dad was a good dad. He was always there, but I didn't live with him. And so it was me, my mother, and my sister. And we had this dynamic where, we would get into these arguments, and my mom had this habit of like, God rest her soul, she, we all evolved and changed and got better over time. But when I was young, we would argue and she would bring up 10 things. And pretty soon I didn't know what we were arguing about anymore. It was just very crazy making. Yeah. It's like, oh, you did this. Do you know that? Do you know what I mean? It's like when you get in an argument,
Yeah.
like, man, you did this and then you did that. And we would argue about that. And yeah, but you did this. Next thing, I was like, I don't even know what we're arguing about anymore. It's just totally crazy making. And it was this thing where it's like, and then we separate and then try to have a discussion. But it's like, I never said that. Or and it was like, yeah, you did. It's like some people wouldn't take responsibility for what they said. And then they wouldn't take responsibility for their actions. My older sister had mental illness, and, I'm 56. When I was 14 years old, my mom was like, oh, we have to watch out. She had clinical depression. We didn't know what that was then. Oh, you have to watch out for your sister, stay close to her, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, at 14, I was like, oh my God, I'm responsible for my sister. So I tried to control her, and she wouldn't act right. So I became controlling, and it created this dynamic where I was taking inappropriate responsibility for her, yet I wasn't taking responsibility for myself, because I could always say, I never said that. Right. So it was this weird thing about responsibility. So when I did the 4-step, I learned what was mine and what wasn't. So
Mm.
I let go of the things that weren't mine. I wasn't responsible for healing my sister. It was a setup for failure. I was never going to be able to help her, right? But I thought I was confused. I thought it was my job, right? So controlling other people and trying to rescue and save and help, that's not my job, right? My job is to take responsibility for my feelings. And so letting go of what wasn't mine helped me bear the weight of what was.
Mm.
So I can conserve my energy and focus on what I could control, which is my actions, not necessarily my feelings, because they'll be like, have you ever heard of that E plus R equals O that was kind of popularized by Jack Canfield?
Oh yeah, years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, event plus response equals outcome.
Yeah.
And so there would be like this event, and my response to it determines the outcome. But what I realized in kind of studying that formula is I didn't have control necessarily of the feeling that would arise. Like I would get triggered by some events. But if I had a process of self reflection, I could let those, and, like in support and a process of talking things through, I could let those feelings subside and then take uh, like appropriate, responsible action. And it does affect the outcomes that I experience.
Mm.
So that was sort of like, that was one of the gifts of the program, is just going through the process of sorting out all my baggage so that I could just let go of what wasn't mine and focus on what was.
Um. Can you keep going? And then, so the work is doing the written inventory in step 4, which is resentments, fears, and sex inventory. So you can sort
Yeah.
out what's yours to take responsibility and what is not yours. And in that process, you begin to see things a bit differently sometimes. You
Ooh.
have a bit of a like, oh, hang on a minute. I thought it was this, but actually it's that.
Yeah. So the first three were sort of coming to the conclusion that my way wasn't working and
Yeah.
that I needed to ask for help and guidance from this higher
Yeah.
power. And it could just be me and my sponsor in the beginning, and then
Mm.
going through this sorting process. And it was so interesting because I highly recommend people write it out with pen and paper. There
Mm.
have been studies done that show that utilizes both hemispheres of the brain, and it does create a different
Mm.
experience than if you're just sitting there typing it out. So
Mm.
I highly recommend that. But what became apparent were these patterns of behavior, not only in my regular life, but in my sexual conduct as well.
Mm.
Turns out I was dating the same guy with a different face,
Yeah.
right? Right? It was the same guy over and over and over again. What I was attracted to then is vastly different than, who I married to now. I met my husband at 5
Same.
months. I met my
Same.
husband at 5 months of sobriety, but I had done a fair amount of work by the time I met him. Listen, they say not to date your first year, and I would support that. I realize
Yeah.
that we're sort of an outlier in that way, but I always say,
Yeah.
so far, so good. But
Yeah. They also say men stick with the men and women stick with women, which is very, very, very good advice. And I have a male sponsor. And the reason for that is
you think you had a male sponsor?
I've had the same
Okay.
sponsor for my first sponsor was a gay Native
Oh,
American woman. And
oh.
then my second spot, then I moved back to England and I couldn't find a woman who had what I wanted. They were all doing the put down, drink, pick up men program that I was doing, and it wasn't working for anybody. And I knew my sponsor and his wife, and
Mm,
he was always a safe man who was appropriate, and I
mm.
knew his wife very well, and he gave me away when I got married. Um,
Oh,
they're coming to visit me actually soon.
oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, we're very like, it's very, very, very important to me, and
Yeah.
that's very good advice. And I've sponsored men as well, and I also, but I'm going to say that that's not a bad rule in general, but there's always variables and outliers. I want to ask about character defects, step 6 and 7, because I have a take on that, and I wondered what yours were about some of the misconceptions about character defects.
Well, I think of them as very early on in recovery. I met this woman who was like, I don't really like that word character defects. I prefer to call them human frailties. And for me, that it delivered the same effect, but
Mm-hmm.
in a compassionate tone. Right. So, and we really rail against this idea of character defects. But the truth of the matter is I was doing some things that were flawed. I was making mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and I needed to get to the root of why I was making these mistakes. And turns out that the reason why I was making a lot of these mistakes is I had learned some survival skills. And in the end, that's what the character defects for me turned out to be, is just dysfunctional survival skills. But, it was maladaptive, like not being honest or dating married men or, you know what I mean? Like, I'll just say that the only married man I date now is my husband. And, he appreciates
Mm-hmm.
that. So there's that. But yeah, like I was selfish, self-centered, self-seeking, right? In character defects, it was explained to me that they are natural instincts that are out of balance. Well, why would they be out of balance? They're out of balance because I didn't know what else to do. Right? There was nobody. I did not learn healthy coping skills when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I read a lot. There's that book, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry. And the premise of that book is that we establish events that happen in our life shape the way our brain develops, our neurotransmitters develop. It wires our neurology and our physiology. And so if you don't have proper guidance or somebody who can kind of coach you through this emotion management that we didn't learn, we develop unhealthy coping skills in
Yeah.
childhood. And those neurological pathways are actually repurposed in adulthood. So what helped us survive in childhood does not translate to healthy coping skills as an adult, but I was repeating these unhealthy patterns. And so I was trying to get my needs met at the end of the day. I
Yeah.
needed
Yeah.
love, I needed security,
Yeah.
I needed community,
Mm-hmm.
and I just
Safety.
wanted
Safety is a big one.
safety, yeah, safety, security. Yeah, really, safety and
Mm.
security are huge to me because I was
Yeah.
not safe when I was growing up,
Yeah.
right? So it's just sort of like looking at this from a more compassionate lens, but it's like, what am I doing wrong? I needed to know because I was confused. And
Yeah.
going through the four-step process helped me identify where I was behaving in a selfish, self-seeking, self-centered way that was maladaptive. And oh, by the way, here's what to do instead. Because it doesn't help to be like, don't do that. Don't think of a pink elephant. What do you think of a pink elephant?
Mm.
It's like I need a sufficient substitute. And so I
Mm-hmm.
needed to know what to do instead. And so as I moved through life with this new information, I was, I had access to people that I could be like, here's what I'm thinking, here's how I'm feeling. And they'd be say, oh, well, it was either a false belief or missing information. And they would help me sort of sort through that. So that to me is, kind of where 6 and 7, where is this continual process of trying to apply the principles to every area of my life.
Yes. And when we talk about God's will, I feel like there's a lot of confusion about that. All
So
God's will
much.
is that I take a good inventory and have a really good look at myself and get out of my own way, which is identifying. For me, I think there's only 4 character defects, which is the selfishness, self-seeking, dishonesty, and fear. And all of them boil down to that. Self-seeking is an old-fashioned word for manipulation.
He's so good at this.
So when like you said, when they get out of balance, those are they're part of human nature, right?
Yeah.
But we have to keep them in check, because if we don't keep them in check, every decision I've ever made based on fear has always been the wrong one.
Yeah.
Always. Any
Oh,
decision you make based on fear will always be the wrong one.
yeah.
Manipulating to get what you want will never get you what you want, right?
Yeah. That is the
Selfishness
truth.
to have it your way makes it shallow, empty, false, alone.
Yeah.
And dishonesty leads to disconnection. So none of those things serve me. And all God's will is that I reveal that to myself and go, oh, what can I change? What bit do I have control over here that I can change? And that is one of the most simple but most life-changing, powerful, like I don't know if Arlina and I are the ripple effects of this work in every single area of your life. We are so far away from alcohol and not drinking. It affects your relationships, your ability to have a relationship, your friendships, your work, your career, your health, your opportunities, your mental, it just permeates everything. Everything.
Yeah, it's a neurotoxin. I thought I learned from the Huberman Lab podcast. He did a really interesting episode on the effects of alcohol. And what I learned is that alcohol permeates, it's water soluble and fat soluble, meaning it permeates every cell of your body. Right. And I also learned that it raises your baseline of cortisol, so that when you're not drinking, you feel more anxious. And then what do we do when we feel anxious when we're drinking? Oh, I
We
need a
want something
glass
to
of
not.
wine. I need a
Yeah.
glass of wine at the end of the night to relax.
Yeah.
And so it has that temporary effect of relaxing, but then it kicks off that cascade that raises your cortisol again, right? It keeps you up at night. It makes you wake up at 3 a.m. It disrupts your sleep. What's interesting about the sleep disruption is that neuroplasticity happens at night when you're at rest. Right. So if you disrupt your sleep patterns, you have a very difficult time retaining new information or learning new things. And so on a physiological level, it's so bad for you. And on an emotional level, relationships, like you said, it affects everything. It's not good.
Amends, making direct amends. What's some of the misinformation we have there?
I mean, I can't speak to what people think, but what I know is that it's not just an apology, right?
Yeah.
I was taught that I would have sponsors that would help me get to a place of empathy for how my behavior affected somebody else, so that I could go back and say, hey, I could see how my behavior affected you in this specific way. Right. And so my amends to you is I will change my behavior moving forward. Is there anything I can do to make it right? Is there anything that you need to say to me? Do you need some time to process this information? Come back to me later. Right. It's like we have to be aware that, like, we've done all our work and processed all the stuff and we're in a very clear place. They haven't had the opportunity to do any of that. So sometimes, like, when you make amends to somebody, it's like, okay, what do you need to tell me? And they're like, I don't even know. You just dropped this bomb on me.
Yeah.
It's like we need to allow space for somebody else to have a fucking feeling. Like, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry I did this thing. I could see how my behavior. I'm so sorry, whatever. And they're like, yeah, you were a dick. Like, they need a minute to have a feeling. And it's up to us to sort of hold space for that, let them process and be like, if there's anything I can do to make it right, you can come back to me later and let me know. You don't need to let me know right now. I mean, there's a way to do it, right? And we don't make amends for things that would cause them additional harm.
Yeah.
If you cheat on your husband, don't tell him that shit, but change your behavior and be a better person and be the best wife you can be, right? Don't tell them things that are going to cause them additional harm. Oh, I participated in character assassination. Me and Jane talked shit about you for 5 hours. Talked about what a horrible person you are. Yeah, don't say that shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? What do you think? What's the misinformation you hear about amends?
Oh, well, I had to do mine in 2 weeks. It's like we don't grovel, and like, we are God's creatures and we don't crawl before anybody. It's not that I'm so sorry. That's manipulation, by the way. That's manipulation. It's about being an adult and being responsible for just your side of the street. And this is one of the most powerful things you can do, because we are so stuck in but they did this. And the only reason I shouted or threw a glass at across the room was because they did this.
Yeah.
And what the amends do is it just keeps you on your side of the street. Is irrelevant what anyone else did, irrelevant. You are just going to clear up, I regret shouting at you and throwing the mug across the room. That was an inappropriate way to respond. That we're just going to let other people be responsible for them. We're not going to point fingers and say it's our fault. We're just going to be responsible for what we have said and our actions, because this is the power bit. right? You're a grown fucking adult. You are, other people do not. This is the most classic story people get stuck in. If they hadn't have shouted at me or done this to me or stole from me or that whatever, I wouldn't have done this. I only, like, if they hadn't have like parked 12 inches on my parking space, then I wouldn't have rammed the back of their car. I only rammed the back of their car because they kept encroaching on my parking space. Like, this is the
I had no choice.
insanity. Like,
Mhm.
I read this stuff in the paper all the time where there was this couple, this is insane. This couple in England, and they didn't like this fence the neighbor put up, and they thought it was like 3 inches on their anyway, they sued them so much they had to sell the house because they couldn't pay the lawyer's fees. That's a resentment, right? It's just a resentment. So it's about, sometimes it's not about being right, it's about being happy, and it's
Yeah.
about being taking responsibility for your own behavior, regardless of what anyone else has done. And that's hard. It's hard because we really want to stay in the, but if they hadn't have done this, I would never have done that or thought that or whatever. And it forces us, nothing will force a behavior change than making amends, because I've done it for over 20 years and it's very uncomfortable and I hate it.
Yeah, it's
And
terrible.
and
Do you
and
know?
then you just very quickly think, I'm not going to behave like that because I
Yeah,
don't want
right.
to have to put it in my
It's
inventory and then have to go and make amends to it for it again.
super painful, super
Yeah.
offensive to my pride and my ego. You know, the thing that really helped me get past that one is this idea of, I responded, like I had to respond to the way they behaved, which is really saying that they are in control of my behavior. They are in control
Yes.
of me. And do
Yes.
I want somebody that I have deep disdain for? Do I really want to abdicate
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
power to that person? Like
Yeah.
that was sort of leveraging my ego in a way that served me.
Yes.
It leveraged my pride in a way that actually served me. So I was like, there is no way, like this person who is, say what you want about that person, that really somebody who really offends you. Really, you're going to abdicate your power to
Yeah.
that
That's
person?
how you give your power. You give your
Absolutely not.
power away. And it doesn't mean that we take responsibility, that we have to accept what's unacceptable. It doesn't mean we put up with abusive
No,
behavior. Absolutely
no,
not. We have
no.
boundaries. We do not
Boundary.
put ourselves in a position if someone is abusive or shouting or whatever. But what we get stuck in is, and this is the biggest for me, one of the biggest things is, for me to be okay, I need you to change.
Yeah.
I need you to apologize and recognize the error of your ways. I need
Yeah.
you to see that this thing you did 5 years ago was very wrong. I need you
Yeah.
to own that. I need you to be humble and apologize, and then I will feel better. And I'm going to tell you, you're fucked.
Wow.
You're fucked if you believe that, because it's never going to happen. It's not going to
But
happen.
what everybody feels that way, right? That is
Yep.
the trap we all
Yep.
fall into. If they would just be, I felt that way about my sister. If she would just act right,
Yep.
if she would do the things that is
Yep.
required of her to be emotionally, mentally healthy. The thing is it caused me pain to watch her suffer.
Yeah.
It caused me pain to watch her suffer.
Yeah.
But that was so selfish and self-centered because I was basing my happiness on her inability
Mm-hmm.
to take care of herself. That was
Mm-hmm.
unfair to both of us,
Yeah.
right? It was very sick and dysfunctional. And by practicing this way of like, it's not her job to make me happy. It's not her job. Like she doesn't
No.
need to do a damn thing. She
No.
doesn't need to be different. And for me to be happy, I am responsible for my feelings. And
Yeah.
when you were to mention boundaries, we often think of boundaries as, it's relationship negotiation, right? Like, how are we going to be in relationship with each other? But for me, and so we think of boundaries as like, oh, we're going to set boundaries with this person. They're not going to cross my boundary. But really, for me, the most of it was boundaries with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Stop acting like you know what's right for anybody else. That's the
Yeah.
only thing I know some things. I've been sober a long time. But what I know for sure is I don't know what's right for anybody else. It's none of my
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
It's up to me to focus, do the self-examination practice and focus on what I can control. And when I actually think about what I can control, it's not a lot. It doesn't feel like a lot sometimes, because sometimes my emotions arise without my permission. And then I feel bad about myself because I had a feeling, right? And so it's been this like constant process of, inviting compassion into, my behavior patterns. And listen, that takes enough energy. I can't be worried about how other people are acting or behaving. I can't make somebody else responsible for my happiness because I just don't have the bandwidth to try to manipulate or control the situation. I'm just exhausted.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think as you get older, you kind of, have lower tolerance for bullshit. So my
Yeah.
life is very simple these days because
This
of that.
makes your life so much simpler. Just being on your side of the street, not dependent on what other people are going to do or not do, being able to choose your response. It just makes life so much easier. Talk to me about 10, 11, 12. Steps
Yeah,
10,
so
11, 12,
it's
which
just
are
the
the growth
craft.
steps.
Yes, continue to take personal inventory, practice prayer,
Yeah.
meditation, trying to carry the message to others. What I learned about neuroscience is that, we have this default mode network, these set patterns of behavior. Your brain's like like a computer, it has an operating system. And so all the practices of prayer, meditation, journaling, self-reflection, inviting in love so that I can make decisions from a peaceful, loving place for all involved, be all spiritual. It's a practice. And if I stop doing my practice, I go back to my default. And I really don't want that.
Have you done that? I've done that at least
Oh,
twice.
every day. I mean, there was something that happened recently. I was trying to be of service to somebody, and they were just committed to misunderstanding me. And it kicked up all my stuff. It was super tricky. My heart was pounding. I was like, got into this. And there was a part of my brain that's like, let it go, block this bitch, do not continue this conversation. But there was a part of me that's like, fuck that, I'm gonna get into it. I'm gonna prove her. I don't know what happened to me. I just got offline.
And then that's why we need, okay, so that's why we need step
And I'm like,
10.
fuck, I'm an asshole. How do I not know this at 30 years sober? But the truth of the matter, here comes compassion again. It was kicking up something. It was touching something, a sore spot on my soul. I had a soul bruise that just hasn't been healed yet. If she had told me I had green hair, I'd be like, that's ridiculous. Of course I don't have green hair. But she said to me, she was like, I think she called me a fraud or an imposter or something like that. And that really hurt my feelings because there's that little part of me that's like, I have some trust issues. I have some self-doubt. There's still parts of me that think, oh, am I a dick? Am I a fraud? I'm imposter syndrome. I'm still human, right? So it was just interesting to sort of, it's been a little bit, but to, go through that self-examination process and go, oh, had I kind of slacked off on my prayer and meditation maybe a little bit? Maybe this was actually for my benefit. Whatever happens to me is happening for me. Maybe this was an area that I didn't know needed healing. So do you know what I mean? So it's, even though I had a painful experience, I was able to use it in a positive way. So the practice of 10, 11, and 12 it's a practice. It's not perfection. I'm going to make mistakes, and maybe even the mistakes are actually only lessons. And it was just maybe another lesson that I needed to invite a little more compassion for myself, which seems to be a reoccurring thing for me is, oh, honey, you just need a little compassion. That's all.
I think what's really important about this is you can have an incredible experience doing steps 1 through 9, but if you are not consistent in your practice of revealing yourself to yourself, you will lose it and revert to type. And my type is restless, irritable, and discontent. And that's what I meant when, like, twice I've just stopped doing everything, and I, like a magnet, drift back to restless, irritable, and discontent.
That's our
And
default mode.
that is my default. Somehow that is my default. And this
Yeah.
practice, I say this so much, people must be bored of it. Consistency. It's like what we were saying at the beginning. Like, pick a program. You don't have to pick this program. Do Smart Recovery or Women for whatever. But you have to, it's not you go and do it for 6 months, you feel better and you stop. It does not work like that. It's like yoga. You just have to keep doing it. Consistently follow the principles of whatever the thing is you pick. And the only reason that we're here where we are with 30 and 24 years of sober is because we have consistently done, I have to tell you, I have a little bugbear when I see every so often there was a spate of these people who got sober in the 12 steps and built Instagram followings or whatever, and then declaring that they had left the 12 steps because they weren't getting anything out of it anymore. And I'm like, oh God, that's theft. Because imagine, I have to go, Arlina, because I have a debt. I have a debt to pay.
Yeah.
What if there was been nobody there when I came in and I was really, really, really stuck? So I still go because I have a debt to pay.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about that. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about it. I and then I think what I kind of went through this phase where I was like, I'm kind of sick of this. I'm kind of sick of it, to be honest. And what I realized, and I almost was like, you know what? I don't think I'm a member anymore. I'm not going to meetings. I don't have a sponsor. I don't think I'm a member anymore. I don't know that that really matters, but because I do service in so many other ways. And so, but I kind of vacillate, I do there because then I needed a safe, there have been times like some challenge, like writing a book is really hard. And, it brings up all my self doubt, and there's some things that happened. And I ended up reaching out to a friend of mine who had this teeny tiny meeting where like 5 women showed up, but they called it a closed meeting. It's like, do you have a desire to quit drinking? Not really. I mean, I don't drink anymore. So it's not like I have a desire to quit drinking, but I did want to go there for support. So, but it kind of thought like, how long is this a lifelong sentence? Do I have to do this forever? Like, is this, it was kind of like this, shaming tone
Mm,
that, oh, you have to go forever. And so that doesn't, I mean, that kind of repels me, to be honest. But when it came down to it in practice, it was easy for me to go to meetings because that was what was familiar to me. And the components of the meeting is like these women that I visit a couple times a week. I feel so safe there that all my stuff is able to come out so I can process it. So I don't think it's important to declare on social media, oh, I've left, because that sort of tells me that, I don't know, there's something that feels fearful about that.
mm,
That's not loving and compassionate. But I don't know, it also doesn't feel loving and compassionate to like, I don't think that there's like, you don't have to just go to meetings, or it's like you can do many things at once. I've always done, like you were saying, I did a conversations with God book
mm,
study, a course of miracles, I've done therapy. I do lots of things. So there's no real
mm,
reason to stop going. Not really.
mm,
If you feel the need, like you need to go deeper, you need something different, like humans crave variety. So sometimes it might just mean that you need to introduce something else, a different kind of practice, like you were talking about yoga, and so maybe it's time to infuse something else in your life. I think the step 12 about carrying the message is really important, and it can be done in a variety of ways. But I kind of have mixed feelings, but I don't think people should be shamed into staying at meetings if that's not appropriate. But I don't know, like I kind of found my way back. I was feeling like I was feeling flat to me for a while. And,
yeah. And I think, honestly, I think everyone goes through those phases. I've definitely gone through those phases where I've just been like,
thank
not
you.
like, don't
Yeah.
want to be here, not interested. I'm not in this place. I'm in a very different place. But
Yeah.
I I was 3 years sober when I was in a very, very, very bad place. And my sponsor took me through the work that was in the big book in a very specific way, and it transformed my life. And
That's the thing. It's such a
I have an
transformation.
obligation to be there for women who get to that place. I just feel that the only way I keep what I have is to give it away in that way. And it's very separate from my work. My work as a coach and therapist is very different
Yeah,
from the
me too.
work that I do in the 12-step fellowships.
Yeah.
And when a woman asked me to show her what I did, I do that.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. My work is very different. I
Yeah.
don't do steps with people
Yeah.
necessarily. Yeah, it is important to give back, and it's like, well, how long do you give back for? It's like, how long are you obligated? Is it a life sentence? Like, how long are you obligated to give back for? I've been giving back for 30 years, but I also give back in other ways, and
But I
kind of
mean, I
maybe,
don't see it like I don't, I get the shine has gone off my recovery when I have not sponsored women, and I sponsor women
mm,
locally. And I get I get so much from it. It's not, I'm not giving,
yeah,
and
that's
it's
the
not, I get so
yeah,
much out of it. And what we get is we build, and I've done this several times, is we build a community around us, is we
yeah,
build a community of this depth of understanding and connection of which I have not experienced anywhere else. So I've moved to a new place, and I'm
oh,
investing.
moving is so hard.
Yeah, and I'm really, I actually just spoke at a really like the first, like they had a big, like 150 people, and they asked me to speak, and because I'm
Nice.
fishing for sponsees locally, because I get so much out of it, and it's such a,
Yeah,
you know, I we are people who normally would not mix, and I have
yeah,
just had this just incredible experiences and relationships with people. So
yeah,
we're staying here, and I want to invest, because what pays off for me down the road is, like, hopefully they have the transformational experience I did, hopefully, but not all of them did. A lot of them just don't do it.
yeah,
Um, is that I get these incredible connections with people that are just incredible to me. So
yeah. Yeah, I definitely go into flow state. Like there's something magical that happens when I
yeah,
do start work with another
yeah.
person. You're right. I kind of, and I
And
do miss that part of it.
and there is definitely something about, and I've had this many times about, like, oh God, I'm too busy. I don't want to give up my time. And there is just something really sacred and spiritual to give of yourself, it,
Yeah.
with no expectation of anything in return. That is just such a spiritual act. Anyway, we're running out of time. This was
I guess.
great. I'm sure, like, this sounds like a fabulous book for anybody who's dancing around the
Yeah.
steps but has a lot of reservations. I know you have a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience. Anything you want to add before we close about the
I
book or
mean,
the?
listen, we could talk all day about this stuff. You know, I will say that I did in the book talk about some of the common misconceptions. I talk about the obstacles that keep people
Yeah,
out. And what I'm trying to offer is like a different perspective. I'm trying to offer a way around these obstacles so that you can get the magical benefits. It's like the closest thing that you can get to a guaranteed transformation at little
yeah.
to no cost.
I know. Yeah.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Keep
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
skepticism. I encourage it. Ask all
Yeah.
your questions. Challenge challenge
Yeah.
authority. If you
Yeah.
find somebody in the program who cannot tolerate questions, move on.
Yeah.
Like find a different sponsor. Find if you
Yeah.
meet people at
Be
meetings for the
discerning. Be discerning.
be discerning. Yeah, but there's a way around every obstacle. Don't give up on the program. Find
Yeah.
different people.
I love that. I love that. And tell Arlina, tell people where they can find you.
So you can find me at soberlifeschool.com. It's like kind of the hub. It's like you can get access to the podcast. You can find out where to learn more about the book. I do have a website called the 12-step guide for skeptics.com. So long. I didn't know what else to do. But you can put your name and email address and kind of get the first section of the book with the table of contents so you can see what's in it. And then I'll be making announcements as to the actual publication date. I'm not sure when this will come out, but it might be out by the end of this month. We're in October, so depending on people are listening to this, I might have. It's so scary.
This
It's
is
like,
coming out at the end of October. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it is okay. You know what? You just decided for me. Thank you. I just need a little encouragement.
All right, everybody. I'm sure there's going to be some comments and questions and even pushback about the stuff we talked about here. So please feel free, go for it. I'd love to see. By the way, this will be on YouTube. My YouTube channel is like kind of taking off, and there's lots of
You're so
comments and
good at
stuff
it.
there.
Your
So
TikTok is so good, man. I remember reaching out to you, and I was like, "How do you do this?" It's like you just been putting in the reps. You just have
yeah,
listen. I just want
it's the
to
same thing. It's
compliment you.
consistency.
I'm gonna try. The marketing and stuff is not my. I should stop telling this story, but no, I just appreciate your clarity, your conciseness, and your ability to just cut through the BS. and get to the heart of the matter. So you're doing amazing work. And thank you so much for having me back on to talk
Well,
about this.
same to you. I'm so glad we're connected. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
It's really it's just been great to have you on the podcast again and have you in my world. So everybody check out Arlina's book, and I will see you next week. Take care, everybody.